Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Welcome to another one of our live stream events. Today we're going to talk about ethnic surnames, finding those ancestors with the not so common names. For those of you who are looking at the slide, you may have noticed my maiden name is Szucs, S-Z-U-C-S, which is a little bit of a tongue twister for those that aren't familiar with the pronunciation. In fact, the Hungarian spelling is actually Szucs. So it could get a little confusing. And I remember as a child going to the store with my grandmother, and she loved to shop for sales. So I remember standing at the drugstore with her one time, and they didn't have the item she wanted. So she started filling out a little rain check. And in that rain check, she wrote Zooks. And I was mortified. I guess I had my family history. It was beginning to bud in me already, the little genealogy bug. So I was mortified that she was deliberately misspelling our name. But she wanted them to pronounce it right when they called her up to tell her item was in. And our ancestors were like that as well. So we have to keep that in mind when we're searching for their records. We want to think about that type of thing. And also, we'll think a little bit about first names as well. So I'm going to switch over to my screen. And hang on one second. So let's think a little bit about their given names. When our ancestors, especially the immigrants, first came to this country, they often used their ethnic given names. Behindthename.com is a really good resource for finding out what that name is, especially when you're looking in passenger arrival records or maybe the census record that was created pretty much right after they came. Look for that ethnic name. For example, this is Jaja, my great-grandfather, John Mikowski, and I'll talk about him a little bit in a minute. But on all his passenger arrival records, he's listed as with the Polish equivalent to John is Jan. The Hungarian Janos use that name on passenger arrival. So when you're going to search for them in those records, remember those passenger lists were created in Europe. So as they were leaving, they were giving it their ethnic version of their name often. Also look for surname variants. Our ancestors really didn't care about how it was spelled. A lot of times, like my grandma, they would just go with a pronunciation that, the spelling that suited the pronunciation. They wanted to hear their name the way they were used to it. For years, I found a lot of different variants for Jaja's last name: Mikowski, Makala, Menkowski, and Menkala. And Menkalska, that last one, is actually how his sister used to spell her name, because the SKA is the feminine ending in Polish names. So those are some things to consider when you're doing searches. And for a long time, I couldn't figure out where that N came in. I just didn't understand that. And then I did a little bit of research into it, and I found out that that E, when you see the little tail on there, that makes an EN sound. So now it makes sense to me. He was doing what my grandma would do, spelling it the way it sounded. And Jaja also, another thing to keep in mind is sometimes they took on aliases. He wasn't an outlaw or a bandit or anything. He couldn't get work. And so he noticed that they were hiring people with German names. And since he spoke German, he decided to pass himself off as German. So he adopted the name Wagner. So that's another thing to consider. And he kept that name for almost 2 decades. And in fact, until World War I broke out and it wasn't very cool to be German anymore, he decided to go back to be Polish then. But he went by Wagner for a long time. And he didn't go to a court, and he didn't have it legally changed. So that's something to consider. Sometimes there's not a paper trail. In this case, he did include his alias on his alien registration in 1940. So that was one way that I was able to verify it. Learn about the names. There are a lot of books out there on surnames, and some really good ones. The Polish Surnames book is how I learned a lot about looking for my Polish ancestors. But there are look for ones on different ethnicities. These are just 4 that I scanned from my collection. And compile a list. There are a lot of great internet websites that can help you out. Compile a list of variants that you can start working with, so that when you're doing your searches, you're making sure you're searching for and covering all the different variations that you're going to run across. Look for surname databases, like the Italian surname database that I have up here. Also, the Hungary Exchange is another place. They have a list of Hungarian surname meanings, and you can see that I pulled out a little section from it there, and they've included some variants as well. So websites like this are going to be really helpful when it comes to figuring out what kinds of variants there were for your ancestor's name. Also, check message boards. Tap into other people's experiences too, people that share your surname. You may even find that they're related, but sometimes you'll see that how the family name kind of evolved through time. At the very bottom, you can, well, first of all, you can search by the keyword. That's going to search the content of the message board, and these message boards are all available on the Collaborate tab. Or you could just browse to a surname message board and see if you can find if there's a board available for that surname. Look through the messages and see what variants other people are searching for. At the very bottom, I've pulled up one. This is from my husband. His ancestors came over as Grunzweig, and then a few generations later it was Greenzweig, and then a little while later it was just Green. So this kind of thing happened. So that's the type of thing you're going to want to look for. And other people who have gone through and done the research may be able to tip you off to some of the different variants for the surname. Now let's put it into practice. When we start talking about searching, there are a few options and a few tricks that we can use to get around those surnames. For example, if you look underneath the search field when you're using the advanced search form, and if you're not using the advanced, up in that upper right hand corner of the search box, you would be seeing show advanced. So you would click on that and it would open up this box here. And you'll see this little link underneath that says use default settings. And that doesn't really tell you a lot, but what that means is the default settings are very fuzzy. We're kind of trying to take into consideration all the different ways your ancestor's name could be spelled. And we employ a few different types of tools and algorithms. Soundex is included. We look for phonetic matches. But sometimes some of those tools can throw things off depending on the name and how the name was misspelled or how it's listed as we wouldn't expect it. In fact, for example, Soundex matches, but for names that just don't sound like they're spelled, I found that really throws them. So a lot of times taking off that Soundex match, I would click restrict to exact matches and maybe just names with similar meanings or spellings, or even phonetic. But for a lot of the Eastern European names where they just don't spell like they look, those two options just don't really work well for me. But play around with them. Turn one on and off and see what you find. You're going to shake up the results you're getting, and you may happen across the result you need. Also, wildcards are a great way. An asterisk is going to match 0 or more characters. Here's the Mikowski example, and you can see that I've put an asterisk where that N is. So that way, if the N is there, it'll pick it up. If the N is not there, it'll also pick it up because it'll also match 0 characters. And then for the ending that sometimes I find is ski, sometimes A, sometimes ska if I'm looking for, or ska if I'm looking for a woman. So that asterisk will pick up all of these different variations, which is really helpful. Now, if you have one character that you'd like to replace, the question mark will work, like Menkowska or Minkowska, that question mark would pick up. But remember that there has to be a character there if there is a question mark. But that's a really helpful thing for when you have, our ancestors sometimes thought that vowels were interchangeable. So that can pick some of those up. Nowadays, the first letter can be a wild card. It used to be that you always had to include that first letter. First letter can be a wild card now, and that's really helpful for when they use the really fancy flourishes for the first letter and it was misread. The rules would be either the first or last character is going to have to be a non-wildcard character, and the name has to contain at least 3 non-wildcard characters. But other than that, you can pretty much go wild and have some fun with it. It'll shake up your searches and give you some new results, and you may find something really unexpected. Another way to get around it is to just scrap the surname. Sometimes we get so hung up on finding that exact name that we're looking for. This is actually a search I did for my uncle. He was trying to find his family in 1930, and he hadn't been born, but he knew his brother Charles was alive. So instead of getting hung up on the Barnby surname, I knew where they lived. I knew they were in Canton, Ohio. So I went to just the county level in the 1930 census. I searched for Charles, Stark County, Ohio, and then I just put in his father's first name and his mother's first name. And just having that family structure, those few pieces of information, were able to bring them right up to the top. And this is the 1930s, so it's not like it was a little unpopulous census. So it's a good trick to know. Think about other things. Relationship to head of household in censuses can help. From 1880 and on, we specified the relationship, so that's really a helpful way, using that family structure to bring your results up to the top. So that's about all I have for today. I noticed a lot of you had a request for some common surnames. And I actually am thinking about doing another one. If you are looking for a class on common surnames, I actually did one on December 22nd. So if you go to our live stream page and page down and view all of the videos, scroll back to about December 22nd, and I did one on common surnames, and I'll try and come up with another one for you. In the meantime, if you have any requests for other classes, we're trying to put together a schedule of classes for the upcoming months. So feel free to post your suggestions on Facebook or email me at juliana@ancestry.com. Thanks for sharing your afternoon with me, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.